Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. Gold is up just slightly, and there's some concerns. At least that's why we think the prices are up, considering the promise of a trade deal, at least from the president here. But some doubts are emerging there too, and that could be moving the prices higher. But let's talk a little bit, and maybe a little insight from you, the viewer, as to what's going on with the Fed. That's right, this article comes to us here from Market Watch, and it's gold is heading higher as the Fed announced the start of a massive bond buying program. You know what the Fed does, it's kind of hard to really decipher, and people read into things, really in some ways to fit their agenda. But in my view, it's healthy to be skeptical about what the central bank is doing. And so I think it's something that we need to kind of dig deeper in or have a better understanding, and also to get some insight from you, the viewer, as to kind of what's going on here with the Federal Reserve. But gold futures rose Monday for the first gain in 3 sessions, finding support for the so-called Phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade deal reportedly hit a snag, and after the Federal Reserve announced last week that it will start expanding its balance sheet this week. The focus on Friday was on the China-U.S. trade deal, which appears to be in limbo pending further talks, Peter Spina, president and chief executive of GoldSeek.com, told MarketWatch. Wariness over the strength of an agreement hammered out between the U.S. and China last week was growing on Monday after a report that Beijing will insist on more talks with the U.S. before signaling any such deal or signing any such deal. As big as the trade talk news was on Friday, it was giant distraction from the real news, said Spina. In a very quiet and sneaky way, the Federal Reserve announced the start of a massive bond buying program. The Fed, in a surprise announcement, set in motion a plan Friday to ease unexpected strains seen in short-term money markets last month. So we're going to pause here and see exactly what that statement was. Here is from the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System here. And the announcement, which was released at 11 a.m. on the 11th of October. So here's a statement regarding monetary policy implementation from the Federal Reserve itself. Consistent with its January 2019 statement regarding monetary policy implementation and balance sheet normalization, the committee reaffirms its intention to implement monetary policy in a regime in which an ample supply of reserves ensures that control over the level of the federal funds rate and other short-term interest rates is exercised primarily through the setting of the Federal Reserve's administered rates, and in which active management of the supply of reserves is not required. And in other words, I think that's what that's saying, is that they're providing this liquidity, this money in between these banking and these institutions to try to be consistent with their rate, whereas other banks may charge a higher rate. So it's a way to keep interest rates low, in a way artificially, not between the banks, but in and of themselves, if I'm understanding that correctly. To ensure that the supply of reserve remains ample, the committee approved, by notation, vote completed on October 11th, 2019, the same day as a release, the following steps. In light of recent and expected increases in the Federal Reserve's non-reserve liabilities, the Federal Reserve will purchase Treasury bills at least into the second quarter of next year, 2020, in order to maintain over time ample reserve balances at or above the level that prevailed in early September 2019. In addition, the Federal Reserve will conduct term and overnight repurchase agreements, that's known as repo, operations at least through January of next year to ensure that the supply of reserves remains ample even during periods of sharp increases in non-reserve liabilities. Now remember, this is something that was supposed to stop on the 10th of October, and then this now extended it to January or to into next year. second quarter of next year, and also to mitigate the risk of money market pressures that could adversely affect policy implementation. And so there you go. These actions are purely technical measures to support the effective implementation of the FOMC's monetary policy and do not represent a change in the stance of monetary policies. In other words, they're trying to ease you back from a fear of another round of quantitative easing here. The committee will continue to monitor money market developments as it assesses the level of reserves most consistent with efficient and effective policy implementation. The committee stands ready to adjust the details of these plans as necessary to foster efficient and effective implementation of monetary policy. So, to me, I'm wondering, since these are short-term daily loans or whatever, back and forth, does that mean they're paid back the next day? I don't know. I don't know exactly how this works. This is behind-the-scenes stuff that's a little bit above my pay grade here. But if that's the case, it's trading money for money. And that money goes back, and so it may not be quantitative easing 4 or a hidden version thereof. But correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing something here. I'll read this next start here. It says, in connection with these plans, the Federal Open Market Committee voted unanimously to authorize and direct the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, until instructed otherwise, to execute transitions in the system open market accounts in accordance with the following domestic policy directive. So effective October 15, 2019, which is today, the FOMC directs the desk to undertake open market operations as necessary to maintain the federal funds rate in a target range of 1.75% to 2%. In light of recent and expected increases in the Federal Reserve's non-reserve liabilities, the committee directs the desk to purchase Treasury bills at least into the second quarter of next year to maintain over time ample reserve balances at or above that prevailed of early September 2019. So I guess getting the T-bills in the bond market, getting into the bond market, I think it's a little different thing than the repo market. So this is an area where we could see a little bit more concern, but again, an area that I'm not quite as astute as far as what exactly this means. But this does give me a little bit more concern than the repos. But nonetheless, we'll go on here. The committee also directs desk to conduct term and overnight repurchase agreement operations, at least through January of next year, to ensure that the supply of reserve remains ample even during periods of sharp increases of non-reserve liabilities, which basically repeats what was said above here. It mitigates the risk of money market pressures that could adversely affect monetary policy implementation. In addition, the committee directs the desk to conduct overnight reverse repurchase operations and reverse repurchase operations with maturities of more than 1 day when necessary to accommodate weekend, holiday, or similar trading conventions. So these are literally short-term, literally within 1 business day or over a weekend, at an offering of a rate of 1.70%. I think this is done to prevent other entities from loaning to each other at a higher rate, to keep it low, because I guess my feeling is if that happens outside of this system, then that rate could be charged, the higher interest rate, which defeats the purpose of lowering the rates in the first place for some of these banks, is my guess is what's going on here. So that is done and then held overnight. The System Open Market Committee account available for such operations on a per counterparty limit of $30 billion per day. Wow, it's a lot of money though. $30 billion per day. The committee directs the desk to continue rolling over at auction all principal payments from the Federal Reserve's holdings of Treasury securities and to continue reinvesting all the principal payments from the Federal Reserve's holdings of agency debt and agency mortgage-backed securities received during the calendar month. Principal repayments from agency debt and agency mortgage-backed securities up to $20 billion per month will continue to be reinvested in Treasury securities to roughly match the maturity composition of Treasury securities outstanding. Principal payments in excess of $20 billion per month will continue to be reinvested as agency mortgage-backed securities. Small deviations from these amounts of operations are reasonable. Reasons are acceptable. So it gives them a little bit of leeway here and there and what's going on. Which, since it does give them leeway, that means it's potential for more scrutiny and to do things that some may consider nefarious or backhanded, to be polite about it. And so we shall see. Again, it's understandable as we to be skeptical, but we don't want to be overboard in how we interpret this here. Back to the article, it says that despite the size of the bond buying program, the Fed does not wish for us to refer to it as quantitative easing, or QE4, said Spina. Yet this is exactly what the Fed is doing, but due to the timing and enormity of the program. And I'm not sure if I'm willing to actually go there or not, especially concerning the repos. But on the other hand, the bond market, I never really have fully grasped what the bond market is. I guess it's a secure way of investing your money to get a return to some point backed by the government. But you know what? Maybe that's why I've always been into gold and silver, because to me that's about as secure as you can get when you think about it. But many times that security sometimes is divorced from the idea of price, because we understand the value that's contained therein. The lesson here, as is most all lessons that what we talk about here on this channel, is that the fact that gold and silver, you can't do anything backhanded with it other than maybe manipulation of price, which we've talked about that for sure, which is where we get into where value versus price comes into play. For most people that feel that way, even if they disagree with me about the severity of manipulation, they understand the true value of gold and silver. So we'll continue to press on and hold those metals as being self-evident for what they are. So there you have it. So post your thoughts below. Do you have any other ideas, theories, or facts regarding the Federal Reserve statement and how that plays into the prices of gold and silver? And we see here that literally within minutes of posting this video, the prices took a massive turn to the other direction. So now they're down pretty by $1, of course, with gold down a fair amount here, down 0.79%. Silver's down negative 1.2%. So maybe there's some announcement that has happened, because when I checked this just before recording this video, it was up slightly. So there you have it. Things can change in an instant, and that's part of the psychology of the markets. Post your thoughts below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for watching, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.